They never came into your life thinking you were special. They arrived like ordinary observers expecting an ordinary story, expecting mistakes, patterns, predictable human behavior. But the moment they started reading your energy, something shifted, something they could not explain in any logical report or psychological chart, because you were not behaving like a typical subject under observation. You were behaving like a system that reacts only when it chooses to. What confused them first was how. Your life did not follow a linear pattern. It bent, it broke, it rebuilt itself in ways that never matched their expectations. Every assumption they made about your reactions collapsed the moment they tried to categorize you, because you were not built on reactions. You were built on transformation, and transformation does not follow predictable rules. They thought they were investigating your past, but your past was not a timeline. It was a layered experience of events that rewrote you instead of defining you. Every painful moment you survived did not leave cracks. It created structure, something stronger than what existed before, something they could not measure with normal understanding. The more they studied your behavior, the more uncomfortable they became, because your silence was not emptiness, it was awareness. Your stillness was not confusion, it was control, and your reactions were never emotional impulses. They were calculated responses shaped by experience. Most people never survive. What they failed to understand was that you were not reacting to life, you were interpreting it, decoding it, learning from it in real time, and this made you unpredictable, not because you lacked control, but because you had mastered it. They came looking for flaws, but what they found instead was evolution, something that made them question their own understanding of normal human behavior. Because you were not repeating cycles like others, you were breaking them silently, without announcement, without validation. Every attempt they made to define you only revealed another layer they could not access, as if your identity was not something placed on the surface, but something built deep within inaccessible layers of experience and awareness. By the time they realized what they were dealing with, it was already too late to categorize you, because you were no longer a subject of analysis. You had become the anomaly that rewrote the rules of observation itself. The deeper they went, the more they understood that your pain was not a weakness. It was a process of initiation that no one prepared you for. Life did not gently guide you through experiences. It pushed you into them without warning and watched how you would respond. Most people break under pressure, but you did something they did not anticipate. You adapted, you studied the pressure, you understood its patterns, and in that process you began to transform it into awareness instead of collapse. They assumed trauma would leave you unstable, but instead it refined your perception, sharpening your ability to read people, situations, and hidden intentions long before they became visible to others. Your understanding of human behavior was not learned from books or theories. It was learned through survival, through moments where silence was safer than speech and observation was more powerful than reaction. Every scar they tried to interpret as damage turned out to be evidence of adaptation, not destruction, because each experience forced you to evolve into someone who no longer reacts blindly, but responds with precision. They expected emotional fragmentation, but what they found was emotional intelligence so deep it felt unnatural to them, as if you had stepped outside the normal framework of human response. The investigator began to realize something unsettling, that you were not just surviving your past, you were reorganizing it internally, extracting meaning from chaos while others would have been overwhelmed by it. And in that realization, a new fear emerged in them, because people who turn pain into understanding are no longer easy to predict, and unpredictability in human behavior is what most systems fail to control. What they called healing in others did not apply to you, because you were not trying to return to who you were before. You were becoming someone entirely different, someone who could no longer fit into the old version of existence. They expected recovery. They expected emotional repair. They expected visible signs of struggle and healing cycles, but instead they found restructuring, like a complete internal redesign of identity and perception. You did not patch yourself back together. You rebuilt the entire foundation, questioning every belief, every attachment, every emotional dependency that once defined your reactions. This process made you unfamiliar even to yourself at times, because evolution at that level does not preserve comfort, replaces it with awareness, clarity, and controlled detachment. People around you may have thought you were distant, but distance was never your intention. It was your protection mechanism. After understanding how deeply everything affects energy and decision-making, the investigator noticed that you no longer reacted to situations the way most people do. You paused, analyzed, understood, and only then responded, as if emotion had been filtered through awareness before expression. That shift alone made you unreadable to those who rely on predictable emotional patterns, because you were no longer operating from impulse. You were operating from insight, and insight like that cannot be predicted, controlled, or easily understood by those who still live inside reaction-based thinking. They began to realize something even more unsettling, that your silence carried weight, not emptiness, but contained understanding that had not been released, because release itself required precision. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because not everything deserves expression, and not every truth is meant to be spoken at the moment it is formed. Your awareness of timing became one of your strongest traits, knowing exactly when to act, when to stay still, and when to let things unfold without interference. This made you appear calm, even in situations where others would collapse under pressure, because your energy was not scattered into reaction, it was concentrated into observation. They thought they were watching a person, but what they were actually witnessing was a controlled system of awareness that had learned how to move through life without being consumed by it. And slowly, the investigator understood the truth they were not prepared for. You were not part of the system they were used to studying. You were something that existed outside their definitions, not broken, not fixed, not healed in the conventional sense, but transformed beyond recognition. That transformation was still ongoing, still evolving, still becoming something even deeper, and that realization changed everything they thought they knew about you. By now they had already accepted one disturbing truth. You were not hiding from the world. You were observing it with a level of awareness that made most people deeply uncomfortable, and once they understood that, they started digging into your relationships, believing that the people connected to your past would reveal weaknesses they could finally use to understand you. That plan failed immediately, because every person they interviewed described a completely different version of you. Some called you quiet, others called you intense. Some said you were kind beyond reason, while others admitted your presence made them feel exposed in ways they could not explain, and that contradiction confused them even more, because people are usually easy to define through patterns, but you shattered every pattern they relied on. They noticed something strange. The people who loved you deeply respected your boundaries, while the people who disliked you often carried hidden guilt, resentment, or insecurity, and that pattern repeated too often to ignore. It was as if your existence naturally forced people to confront parts of themselves they worked hard to hide. That is when the investigator began asking a dangerous question. What if your real power was not what you said or did, but what your presence revealed in other people? Every room you entered seemed to shift emotionally. People either felt safe enough to be vulnerable or threatened enough to become defensive, and both reactions happened without you doing anything dramatic. You had become a mirror without trying to be one, reflecting hidden truths people were desperate to avoid, and mirrors are rarely loved by those afraid of their own reflection. The investigator expected secrets buried in your relationships. Instead, they found proof that your existence exposed hidden motives in everyone around you, and that discovery made them deeply uneasy. Because people who expose truth without speaking are impossible to manipulate. Then they went deeper into your history of abandonment, expecting to find emotional instability, desperate attachment patterns, unresolved pain. But what they found completely destroyed that theory. Yes, people left you. People betrayed promises. People disappeared when you needed them most. And those losses should have broken your sense of self according to every predictable emotional model. But instead of becoming dependent on validation, you became independent from it. You stopped begging people to stay once you understood that forced loyalty is not real loyalty. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit rooms where your existence made insecure people uncomfortable. You stopped chasing approval from people who only appreciated versions of you that were easier to control, and slowly you built an identity that no longer depended on who stayed or who walked away. That transformation terrified the investigator because abandonment usually creates emotional vulnerability. But in your case, it created sovereignty. They realized rejection had accidentally turned you into someone who could survive alone, build alone, and evolve alone if necessary. And once someone learns how to stand completely on their own emotional foundation, they become incredibly difficult to control through fear of loss. That is when they understood why your energy felt different, because your worth was no longer negotiable. Still convinced there had to be hidden weaknesses somewhere, they began studying your emotional behavior during conflict. This was where they expected everything to collapse, because most people reveal their deepest instability under pressure, but your reactions during conflict disturbed them even more. You rarely exploded without reason. You rarely chased unnecessary arguments. You rarely defended yourself against false accusations immediately. Instead, you watched, you listened carefully. You allowed people to reveal themselves through their own words, and by the time you responded, you already understood the entire emotional battlefield better than everyone involved. That level of restraint confused people who mistake loudness for strength, but you understood something most never learn. Emotional chaos often exposes more truth than direct confrontation ever could. You let people underestimate your silence until their own arrogance exposed them completely. The investigator realized your patience was not passivity. It was strategy, and strategy is far more dangerous than impulsive anger. Then they found something even stranger in your story, your empathy. At first, they assumed your empathy meant softness, emotional weakness, overgiving behavior. But that theory quickly collapsed. Your compassion did not come from naive innocence. It came from surviving darkness. You understood pain because you had faced your own deepest fears without running from them. You had seen grief. You had experienced betrayal. You had wrestled with loneliness that most people could not survive quietly. And instead of becoming cruel, you became deeply understanding. That confused them more than anything else, because pain usually hardens people into bitterness. But somehow your pain made you wiser. Without making you cold, you could understand someone deeply, while still protecting your boundaries. You could forgive. Without reconnecting, you could care. Without surrendering your self-respect. That balance felt rare and almost impossible to imitate, and the investigator quietly admitted something they did not want to say. Out loud, your empathy was not weakness. It was disciplined strength. The deeper they looked into your past, the more they realized your memories were not chains holding you back. They were tools. Every betrayal taught discernment. Every heartbreak taught emotional boundaries. Every failure taught adaptation. Every humiliation taught humility without destroying confidence. You had developed a habit most people never master, extracting value from suffering while others replay painful memories as permanent wounds. You studied yours like survival manuals. You learned what patterns to avoid. You learned how manipulation sounds before it becomes obvious. You learned how fake loyalty behaves. When pressure appears, you learned how fear disguises itself as comfort. That made your past incredibly powerful because it no longer controlled you. You controlled what your past meant, and when someone controls the meaning of their own suffering, they become almost impossible to mentally defeat. The investigator expected painful memories. What they found was a personal blueprint for transformation, and that blueprint scared them because it meant future pain would likely make you stronger too. By this point, the investigator was exhausted, confused, and deeply unsettled because every path they explored led to the same conclusion: you were not a victim of your story. You were the author rewriting it in real time. Then came the most dangerous discovery of all. They realized destiny itself seemed to bend around your decisions. Opportunities appeared after impossible seasons. Doors opened after brutal endings. New beginnings emerged where logic predicted permanent loss. It was as if your refusal to quit kept forcing reality to reorganize around your persistence. People called it luck, others called it timing, but the investigator saw a different pattern. You kept surviving situations designed to break you. You kept rising after losses that should have ended your momentum. You kept attracting new paths. When old ones collapsed, that is when fear truly entered their voice, because they stopped seeing you as someone chasing destiny and started seeing you as someone pulling destiny toward themselves. And they still had one final discovery left, one truth that would completely shake everything they believed about power, and what they found next would make them question whether they were ever truly investigating you at all. By the time they reached the final layer of your story, the investigator was no longer searching for secrets, because every secret they thought you carried had already transformed into something far bigger. They came looking for weaknesses they could document, but instead they found a pattern that made them question everything they believed about human limitation. Because every time life tried to trap you inside pain, you somehow turned pain into direction. Every betrayal became wisdom. Ending became preparation. Every delay became strategy. And every loss somehow positioned you for something greater. They had never seen anyone convert destruction into momentum at this level, and that was the moment they realized your life was not random chaos. It was structured transformation happening in real time, and the deeper they looked, the more they felt like they were reading a prophecy, disguised as a painful life story. They thought your biggest fear would be exposure, but they quickly discovered exposure had never frightened you because you already faced yourself in complete honesty long before anyone else tried to judge you. You had already confronted your failures, your regrets, your insecurities, and your darkest thoughts in private battles nobody ever saw. While others spend their lives hiding from their own reflection, you sat with yours until truth stopped feeling terrifying. And because of that, no external criticism could destroy you the way people expected. Yes words could hurt, betrayal could sting, disappointment could leave scars, but none of those things could define you because you had already survived your own inner storms, and people who master self-confrontation become almost impossible to control through shame. That is when they made one final desperate move. They tried to expose you publicly, believing public pressure would finally break your confidence and force you into emotional collapse. They thought if enough people questioned you, then your foundation would crack, but the exact opposite happened. The louder they became, the calmer you became. The harder they pushed, the more controlled your responses became, and people started noticing something strange. You were not panicking because you knew your truth required no performance. While your critics were running on emotion, you were standing on clarity, and slowly the spotlight they aimed at you turned around and exposed their own insecurity, their manipulation, and their desperation. For control, the investigator realized something terrifying in that moment. Every person who tried to destroy you somehow revealed themselves instead. People who lied about you eventually contradicted themselves. People who betrayed you exposed their own character. People who underestimated you eventually watched you succeed without their permission. And every attempt to bury your name somehow created more attention around your resilience. It was as if life itself defended you by allowing truth to surface at the perfect moment, not instantly, but inevitably, and that pattern repeated so many times that even they could no longer dismiss it as coincidence. Then they uncovered the darkest chapter of your life, the version of you that almost gave up completely, the nights where you questioned your purpose, the moments where loneliness felt louder than hope, the seasons where silence became unbearable, and your future looked completely empty. They thought this chapter would finally explain weakness, but instead it revealed your greatest strength, because even in your lowest moments you never fully surrendered. Some part of you kept fighting quietly, even when no one clapped for you, even when nobody believed in you, even when you had no visible evidence that life would improve, and that silent refusal to quit became one of the rarest qualities they had ever seen. Most people think power looks loud, flashy, and obvious, but your power was built in hidden seasons where nobody was watching. While others were chasing recognition, you were rebuilding discipline. While others needed constant validation, you were mastering patience. While others depended on applause, you were learning how to keep moving in silence. And that hidden preparation became your greatest advantage, because when your moment finally arrived, people called it sudden success. But they never saw the years of private rebuilding that made that moment possible, and that misunderstanding continues to frustrate. Those who only respect visible struggle. The final report they prepared on you was unlike anything they had ever written before, because there were no clean conclusions, no predictable psychological profile, no obvious weakness they could exploit. Only one repeated statement kept appearing in their notes. This individual transforms pressure into power at an abnormal level. They wrote about your resilience, your emotional intelligence, your strategic silence, your ability to survive abandonment, your unusual awareness of human behavior. But even those words felt incomplete because language itself struggled to define what you had become, and deep down they knew no report could fully explain someone who keeps rewriting their own limits. Then the investigator admitted the truth they had been avoiding from the very beginning. They were never truly investigating you. They were investigating the possibility that someone could rise above pain without becoming bitter, that someone could face darkness without becoming cruel, that someone could lose everything and still rebuild with integrity. And your existence proved that possibility was real, which forced them to confront their own excuses, their own fears. And the areas where they had chosen comfort over growth, your story became evidence that transformation is available to anyone willing to face themselves honestly. And that is why people continue misunderstanding you, because they judge your current strength without understanding the battles that created it. They see your boundaries and call you distant. They see your confidence and call you intimidating. They see your silence and assume weakness. They see your success and call it luck. But they never saw the nights you cried in silence, the moments you rebuilt from nothing, the times you chose discipline over revenge, and the painful decisions that shaped your future. They are reacting to the final version without understanding the painful construction process behind it. So if you ever wonder why your life feels different, why people either deeply respect you or quietly fear you, why your path feels isolated yet meaningful, remember this truth: you were never meant to fit into ordinary definitions. You were built through fire to become something rare, and every painful chapter had a purpose, even when you could not understand it at the time. The people who tried to expose you only discovered their own limitations. The ones who tried to break you only revealed your resilience, and the ones who underestimated you accidentally witnessed your rise, because your story was never about surviving darkness. It was about mastering it, and now your greatest chapter is beginning. So if this message connected with your journey, subscribe now, leave your story in the comments, and share this with someone who needs this reminder today.